My brother destroyed my $22,000 greenhouse to teach me a lesson. My parents tried to make me pay a $2,200 family restaurant bill as proof of forgiveness, and I chose boundaries over blood, with receipts, hard lines, and a bittersweet new beginning built with my own two hands. The white tablecloth was already stained when I got there, 2 rings from sweating wine glasses, and a small constellation of soy sauce from a plate of tuna I hadn't touched. The dining room had that kind of expensive glow that makes everything look softer than it really is. The hostess called me ma'am twice and wondered if I was with the party of 12. My mother had reserved a back room under my brother's name. 10 minutes late, she said the second I stepped in. She didn't stand up. I said, traffic, and glanced around for a chair, any chair. The 12 top was already full. My aunt's cardigan dangled from the only empty one like it had grown there. Sit at the little table by the bar, my dad said, like he was offering me a private room instead of a table for 2 pushed near the host stand. It's quieter. Quieter meant I'd be close enough to watch the servers avoid making eye contact with me, and far enough to feel like I was at school lunch again. There was a couple on a date beside me, leaning toward each other like magnets. Maybe you notice these things more when your own family tilts away. I set my purse down and told myself it didn't matter, because this was a truce dinner. They were calling it that, a reset. After a month of silence and 1,000 leaked seconds of adrenaline that I hadn't known where to put, we were here. To eat. To move forward. To forgive. My brother lifted his glass. Tyler was wearing a watch I'd seen him try on in a mall without buying. He had the watch now.
To family, he said.
He didn't look in my direction. Heidi, his fiancée, wore a pale silk dress that pooled at her wrists like water. She smiled at me, the kind of smile you give a neighbor when their dog barks every night and you want to prove you're still polite. I ordered a seltzer and a salad because I'd already eaten half a granola bar in the car. I couldn't stand the thought of paying for their dry-aged steaks when I had a greenhouse frame sitting in my yard like a ribcage. The server came back twice, slow and careful, to ask if I wanted anything else. The second time she lowered her voice, like she knew something. You're Isabella? She asked. No, I said. Lena. People always hear Helena or Lena. It makes them think I'm softer than I am. She flushed. I'm sorry. I was told to. Your father said. The words got stuck. She was looking at her tray, not my face. I knew that look. When bad news passes, through someone else's hands. What did my father say? I asked. I could feel the room heat up and then cool again in my chest. I was not the kind of woman who got loud in restaurants. I was the kind of woman who wrote orders on seed packets and washed her hands with vinegar because someone taught her that's what gets tomato resin off skin. The server glanced toward the back room and then down at the check presenter peeking out from beneath the napkin on the 2 top. It was placed like a folded offer. She swallowed. The bill goes to you. I looked over at the big table. Tyler was telling a story with his hands, casting shadows on my mother's plate. Her back was rigid, like she'd forgotten how to lean. The bill, I said. Your father said you offered, and he asked us to make it easy, so we can just run it when you're ready. Her words were pure apology, warm and useless. She was just the message, not the sender. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my dad appeared on the lock screen with a formatting of a work email. Let's show unity tonight. I looked back at the 2 top bill fold like it might snap if I touched it. There was a pen tucked neatly beneath it, claiming it as mine. I picked it up and slid it open not because I was going to pay right then, but because I needed to see the number I'd be saying no to. $2,198.47. The number looked like a road mile marker. Meaningless unless you'd been the one walking. The steaks were $64 each. 2 bottles of wine at $310 apiece. Oysters, cocktails, desserts in polite bowls. My salad was $15. The appetizer for the table was $120 worth of roasted marrow with Iberico and bitter greens, and the server had set it closer to Tyler's elbow than mine. The server coughed. We can split it if you want, she offered quietly. We can itemize. I can ask a manager. No, I said. My voice came out calm, and I could feel that calm like glass at the edge of a table. One good bump, and it would be gone. Leave it. I'll talk to them. I stood up. The dining room was full of easy voices. In the corner, a man tilted his head back and laughed without making a sound. The kind of person who's never had to explain anything he's done. I knew I was about to do the thing you don't do when you're a polite woman in a nice place. But I hated that I could picture, exactly, the way my face looked when I swallowed something I hadn't ordered. "Ty," I said softly, stepping into the swipe of overhead light at their table. "Dad." "Mom." My mother put her napkin on her plate like she was done eating. "We were going to talk," she said, fingers twitching for her water glass. "Don't make a scene, Lena." "I won't," I lied. "It's her treat," my dad said to the table, smiling instead of looking at me. Lena wanted to do something special. To show. "To show what?" I asked. I could hear how it sounded. Not quite bitter. Tired in a way that had stopped being young. Tyler set his fork down. He had his jaw set in that particular, "You've always been so dramatic" line he learned from our father. "Don't be weird," he said under his breath, and then louder, like he'd just remembered we were a family and not actors in a series. "It's a reset, Elle.
Be cool.
You can afford it. Because you destroyed my greenhouse," I said, and the word destroyed came out too clean. Like I'd opened a hydraulic door and slipped through.
My aunt made a sound.
Heidi looked like someone had turned a book upside down in front of her. My dad sucked his teeth.
"We talked about it," he said.
"We said we were moving forward." I nodded. "We did. But if the bill is part of moving forward, then we're going to talk about what's already been charged." No one said anything. In the corner of my eye, the server hovered, with a tray. I watched my brother glance at his fiancée, and then away again, like he'd been caught checking the weather. "What do you want to talk about?" my mother asked. She said it like a trap and a dare. "The cost," I said, "of being your daughter and his sister. And what's due." People always assume when you grow things that you grew up soft. That someone cleaned your scissors and someone else kept an eye on the sky. I grew up on a street where the maples bulged the sidewalks, where self-employed meant you fixed things on the weekends and gave cash for birthdays. Our house was 2 stories with peeling clapboard, a garden out back that my mother called a yard, and a shed that leaned so far to the right my father said it was modern art. We had 2 apple trees, one decent, one mean. The mean one bloomed every spring like it celebrated alone, and the decent one took the hint. I remember my mother pitting tiny apples with a paring knife, pulling stems with her teeth. "You have to take the bad spots out first," she said, "or it ruins the bowl." My brother, Tyler, was born 3 years after me, a summer baby who slept like someone had whispered instructions to him. He was sunstreak blonde until middle school, when his hair darkened, and with it the way everyone looked at him. He had a face made of easy lines, an expression like the next fun thing was just off camera. People wanted to say yes to him. My mother loved the idea of everything Tyler could be. "Don't box him in," she'd say when my dad wanted him to get a part-time job that wasn't skate shop barter. Then she'd turn to me and ask me to box up the winter clothes, box up the books, box up the leftovers. Like how to get things from one place to another without losing something important was my only trick. It always felt like there was a room in our house I wasn't invited to. Not an actual room, a feeling place. There were conversations that floated above my head, things they said about me that were tidy and true enough. She's responsible, she likes quiet things, but not complete. Tyler got nicknames that were really compliments: Golden Boy, Sparky, where I got adjectives that sounded like obligations: steady, helpful, good. When she was 27, my mother started getting migraines that lasted 2 days and swallowed her vocabulary. She would grip the edge of the counter and breathe while her face went gray. I learned to read the tea leaves of her temples, brew coffee quiet as a secret, shepherd Tyler out of the house, find the light bulbs that hurt less. By the time I was 27, she'd traded migraines for something she wouldn't name. Her hands shook sometimes when she held a fork. The neurologist called it idiopathic when he didn't have other words. "Wear a hat," he told my mother, the way a childhood doctor might advise against swimming after dinner. She wore a hat. My dad used to be a mechanic, and then he was a parts manager at a chain that didn't love him back. He came home with his shirt smelling like rubber bands and burned oil. He taught me practical things, how to check tire pressure, what to look for in a used car, but none of it was about mystery. He didn't say much. When I got my first period, he bought me a heating pad and handed it to me while the TV hummed in the background. We weren't the family that named every feeling. We were the family that named the dog twice because we couldn't agree. I was the plant kid who wasn't precious about plants. My first attempt at growing anything wasn't in a window box. It was in the scraped dirt near the shed, where nothing wanted to be. I put beans in the ground because the packets were 50 cents and the hardware store guy had told me not to overthink it. When the vines came up and curled around the stick I'd shoved in the ground, I could feel my heartbeat in my teeth. The summer before college, Mrs. Duarte next door offered me her late husband's greenhouse shelves. They were wooden and splintered in the corners and smelled like lemon oil. I carried them back and forth across the yard like someone had asked me to move a piano. My mother watched from the kitchen, one hand on a glass. "So you're a gardener now," she said. "We can't eat all the time." She didn't mean it the way it sounded. Or she did, and it wasn't the point. In college, I studied environmental science because that's what it was called, not because I knew how to make money with it. I loved soil analysis, leafing through diagrams like someone had left me a coded book. I loved coming home for winter break and finding the garden dead on top and alive underneath. I loved not having to explain why watching something grow felt like therapy without a couch. Tyler tried community college for a semester and didn't like anyone telling him where to be. He took jobs that had uniforms and threw the hats on the passenger seat. He had an accident with a dirt bike that left his knee held together with something stronger than will, and a scar he showed off like a story with a happy ending. He liked to call me professor when I reminded him of deadlines. "Relax," he'd say, flicking my hair with a finger like he was checking the wind. The summer I turned 31, I had more savings than anyone thought I should. I say that without bragging. I was good at not buying things. I didn't like bar drinks or salon chairs or blowout bars or vacation photos. I liked the way a seed catalog read like a map to somewhere I'd already been. I liked work you could count in inches and hours. I liked paying back the small loans my mother had taken from me in my 20s with money she called grocery cash and I called proof of care. We bought the greenhouse kit in May. I say we even though I paid for it myself because that was how it felt. Me and the afternoon light. Me and the baseboards. Me and the two men I'd hired, who showed up in vans with ladders and work boots that made careful footprints in the soft dirt. Liam ran a hand across the polycarbonate panels like they were a new kind of instrument. "This is good stuff," he said. "It'll hold." It was $22,000 all in, the kit, the benches, the heater, the thermostat with a name that sounded like a spaceship, the exhaust fans, the frost cloth, the shade cloth, the portable sink that felt like it shouldn't cost as much as it did. I kept a spreadsheet that gave me a headache and a thrill. I printed it and put it in a folder and labeled the folder with a Sharpie, dragging the tip across the cardboard until the letters looked like I'd wanted them to. The first time I turned the heat on and watched condensation bead on the inside of a window, I pressed my palm to the pane and laughed on purpose. I took photos I didn't post online. This was something that even the people who loved me might not understand, and I didn't want to hear myself explaining before I believed. When my mother came over, she carried in a bag of coffee beans like a housewarming present. "Smells like a reptile house," she said, smiling, leaning into the door frame like she didn't trust the floor but was willing to try. Tyler came later, whistled once like he was impressed, and then tapped the metal frame with his knuckles like it was a car he might buy if he had the cash. "Don't go all eccentric rich woman on us," he said, and there was compliment in it, I swear. There always was. He didn't consider the aftertaste. "Is this a hobby?" my dad asked, standing with his hands in the back pockets of his jeans, looking at the heater like it might be judging him.
"Or a job?"
"It's a business," I said without looking away from the seedling tray. I could feel him measuring the distance between my mouth and the floor and finding fault with it. "And a home for my plants." Later, as we walked back to the house, he said, "Don't set yourself up for disappointment." "Don't set me up," I said before I could stop myself. We had Sunday dinners because that's what my mother liked. It wasn't church, and it wasn't therapy, and sometimes the pizza came out of a freezer, but it was a set thing, a shared time. I would bring greens, shaved fennel that tasted like candy if you did it right, arugula cut the day of, cherry tomatoes that burst and made a mess. Tyler would bring a new beer he'd read about, and my dad would bring a piece of news about a man from work that you couldn't do anything about. My mother would have a new strategy for keeping cilantro fresh. We would talk about them all, the weather, the price of gas, my aunt's dog. I would not talk about the spreadsheet unless someone asked, which they didn't. The cracks were there from the start, but they sounded like normal. They sounded like jokes. Tyler would say, "You're a land baron now." My mother would say, "Maybe you can help us with the electric bill if it gets cold early this year." My dad would say, "Don't post things that make people think you're flush. You'll get robbed." And then, "I saw a story about a woman like you who was." Then my mother would look at me and say, "You know what he means. He worries." She wore worry like a sweater. She said it was air conditioning. The first season was good, like beginner's luck in soil form. I grew enough microgreens to make a restaurant chef clap, literally clap, when I showed up with a cooler like a magician's trunk. I learned quickly, faster than I expected. I made friends at the market. Ruby, who sold bread, and Sam, who sold jam, and Zoe, who brought flowers. We traded like we were kids, moving a lemon cake from one table to another in slices until it dwindled to crumbs. I came home on Sunday sunburned and happy tired, feeling like I'd been seen and not measured. My family was proud in the way of people who kept asking if I needed to scale, and then didn't ask what scaling would look like. Tyler borrowed a tray of microgreens once for a party. "It's not really borrowing," I said. He lifted a leaf with his finger to his mouth and said, "You're so serious," which I've learned is how people tell you that what you care about makes them feel small. I started covering small bills. It began like tipping. An extra 100 here, 50 there. I wasn't being used. I was participating. When my mother's migraines moved into new territory and her hands shook hard enough that she would sit on them, I found a specialist who might as well have been a wizard for how much the appointment cost. I paid for it because there are moments when money, if you have it, is easier than asking someone to become different. My dad was laid off and went back, but at a lower position that didn't include dental. We took turns hiding our mouths when we laughed, like we were afraid of the camera that only some families have pointed at them all the time. By the winter, my greenhouse had a routine. The heater had a personality. It preferred to be left alone. The thermostat was a boss who didn't micromanage. The air moved well. The condensation collected in neat lines. The lights burned soft at dusk. I learned how to wake up and not dread the weather. I learned to love the weather like someone who had made an agreement with it. "Seems like it's working," my dad said one night, walking through the door like he'd been invited. "Seems like I was wrong." He looked proud when he said wrong. "You weren't wrong," I said. "You just didn't have an imagination for this." He wasn't a bad man. He just believed in gravity. Tyler believed in luck. The year everything went from tricky to tight had no warning label. It was just a winter that decided not to be mild. The heater ran like it was trying to prove something. I checked it twice at night, and once at 4 in the morning while the town was asleep and gasping. You learn your home sounds. I learned my greenhouses, the hum, and the tick and the sigh. My mother's hands got worse in November. Her doctor gave it a name that my mother could hold in her mouth like a sugar cube and let dissolve. Early onset essential tremor, likely to progress, lifestyle accommodations. It was something you could have without being tragic. It was something you could have and still be expected to make Thanksgiving stuffing. When she couldn't write the grocery list, I told her I had it. When she couldn't sign a check, my dad signed for her, and we looked at each other like criminals who practice by signing each other's names on the air. Tyler got a job installing home theater systems and started speaking a new language about sound quality and millimeters. He liked the way houses smelled when they were expensive. He'd come home on Sundays to my parents' tiny dining room and talk about a sofa that cost more than my entire setup and a wall you could touch to make it warm. "This one guy had a humidor bigger than my car," he said, chewing on a bread crust. I asked him what he put in it if he doesn't smoke cigars. He said, "I put cigars in it." Heidi was in the picture by then. She had a graduate degree in public policy and wore sneakers that looked like a cartoon of sneakers. She was sharp, funny, and impossible to dislike. She did the thing where she got things done without making a big deal of how hard she had worked for it. I liked her, and not just because she wasn't from us. She worked for a nonprofit that fed kids after school. It wasn't performative. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fair sometimes.
She did it anyway.
Heidi and I hung out on the edges of Sunday cleaning up because we were good at it. "Does this belong in the dishwasher?" she'd ask, holding up a bowl, and I would say, "I do it by hand," because the dishwasher had to be coaxed and had a button you had to hit twice, and my mother always said she was saving it for when it mattered. Tyler proposed in April in a park that had a metal sculpture of something abstract enough to be anything. The ring was gorgeous. My mother cried the way people cry when they watch someone else feel joy and feel their own life pass through them at the same time. My dad did a thing with his mouth I couldn't read, and then clapped his hand on Tyler's shoulder like that was the way men say yes to love. After they got engaged, the wedding conversation turned into a money conversation in a way that made me itch. It wasn't that they wanted help. It was that they assumed it would be there. Heidi's parents were paying for the catering. Tyler wanted a band with a brass section that could do September without irony. My parents said, "We can handle the rehearsal dinner," and my dad looked at me. "Where?" I asked, even though I knew he didn't know yet. He'd clicked the idea before he checked the cost.
He did that a lot.
It was hard to fault a man for wanting to claim one celebratory piece. The greenhouse was my good news in a season where the town had none. An ordinance had passed that allowed urban growers like me to sell to restaurants directly, without jumping through licensing hoops that made you feel like you were lying. I got a contract with a chef who liked phrases like farm to fork without pretending he invented food. The check hit my account the first of every month, and I put my forehead on the table once when I saw it, out of relief and pride, and something else that made my throat hurt. I also started writing checks to my parents, without the ceremony of saying I was. Electric. Groceries. A new washing machine when my mother's old one started making a sound like a dying animal. I covered the specialist copay. I told myself that money was the easy thing and the important thing for people who never had enough of it, and that I didn't have children who needed me to pick someone else's up. Tyler asked for money once to cover a deposit on a venue, not because he couldn't afford it, but because his cash was tied up in a project. He said it like a businessman on a call. "I'll pay you back," he said, "when the jobs free up." He had a way of making debt sound like fun, like we were all playing a game of Monopoly where I'd claim railroads he'd never land on again. I said yes because it wasn't a huge amount, and because I didn't want to be the person who says no to love. Don't misunderstand me. I hear myself. I know love isn't measured in napkins and lighting packages. But there is a certain kind of family where you measure your love by your willingness to go without. It's not noble. It's a habit. When the tremor got bad enough that my mother started dropping things, she tried to hide it. Her ring finger had a callus where the metal had rubbed. "It's not a thing," she'd say, and my dad would say, "It's a thing," and the days felt like we were playing the quietest game of telephone. She stopped driving at night. She stopped buttering her own bread. She went for walks in the morning when the light was so clean it made you want to be good. I started saying no to small things, so I could say yes to big ones. No, I couldn't stay late after market and have a beer with Ruby and Sam and Zoe and the woodworker with the dog. Yes, I could make time to bring my mother to appointments. I could do both, but then I wasn't a person. I was an application someone had left open. My dad found out he'd been cut from the dental plan in an envelope that said, "We love our team," and went quiet in a way that made us all lean toward him at once, and then back away like the house had become a stage with a trapdoor. He started using my mother's toothpaste because it said whitening extra, and he felt like a man who didn't deserve bright things. The favor that became a fracture was small, at first. Tyler asked to store a few things in my greenhouse temporarily because their apartment was tiny and the landlord had a no-gas rule, and he had bought a tankless water heater that didn't fit anywhere else. "Just a week," he said. He had a way of making 7 days into 3 months without changing the pitch of his voice. "No tanks, Ty," I said. "That's a fire risk." "There's no gas in it," he said. "It's like a statue. Just for a week." "Put it in our basement," my dad said. which would have involved moving 3 decades of things none of us wanted to look at. I can't have a tank in here, I said again, heat eddying around us. If you've never argued inside a greenhouse, you might not know how close the air feels when you're defending a boundary. It's like trying to draw a line in steam. Don't be dramatic, he said. It's like a piece of furniture. No, I said, and my voice got smaller instead of bigger, which is a thing you notice when you want to be the kind of woman who booms.
No. Out.
He rolled his eyes and did the thing where he puffed out his cheeks. You're so intense when you get a little success. He said success like it cost me nothing. He left with the tank. It was heavy. He avoided my gaze while he loaded it into the back of his truck. We both knew he wouldn't let it go, not the tank, not the no. The tremor got worse. The bill for my landlord's insurance renewal arrived. I heard the word deductible twice as often as I used to. I thought about calling a lawyer when a vendor tried to back out of payment and then asked myself why I was trying to build something in a place where people said things like, it's a hobby, and you can't keep that up, and how long do you think that will last, if they were feeling kindly. At the end of the summer, I got a letter from a bank I didn't have an account with, explaining that the application had been denied due to lack of information. The letter used my full name, my social, my mother's maiden name. I took it to my mom because that's what I still did with paperwork, like she was the register of deeds for my life. We didn't open anything, she said, and then she put her hand on the table to steady me because my face had changed without my permission. Did you apply for something using my I started, and my dad, who had been the one who taught me my social security number like it was spelling my name, said that was years ago, before I finished the sentence. It didn't go through. What was it for? I asked, and he looked at the wall behind me like he had the answer written there. It was to cover Tyler's, he said, and stopped. It was to help Tyler when he... And then he stopped again, and the only thing I could do was put my hands flat on the table to feel something real. It was 8 years ago, my mother said in a voice she used for mixing vinegar and water for cleaning mirrors. He was in a place where he needed a little help. We didn't want to worry you. It didn't go through, so it didn't matter. It matters, I said. It matters that you used me to try to help him without asking. My dad had the decency to look like he knew that. We didn't think you'd say yes, he said, and there it was. The thing at the center. Not money. Permission. Tyler said I was making everything weird when I brought it up. It didn't go through, he said, shrugging. So what are you mad about? This is what people say when they've swallowed more than their share and think everyone else is full. I wasn't mad then. I was something else. I was no longer under anesthesia, but they were still cutting. It wasn't one act. It never is. It was a series of soft pushes that moved me toward a night in late November when wind shivered through the town like a dog after a bath, when a hard freeze warning slid across phone screens in a red bar. The police cars sounded further away. The moon had the gauze wrapped around it that means the air wants to pretend to be warmer than it is. Tyler had keys to my place from years ago, from watering plants when I went to my aunt's cottage for a weekend that now felt like mythology. He'd never returned them because that's how caring math works in families like ours. You only add. He wanted to use the greenhouse for photos. He'd gotten a new camera on sale and wanted that blown-out look where light on leaves made love to people's faces. "Half an hour," he said. "You won't even know I was there." "No," I said, the way you do when you love someone and don't want to push them up against your own wall. "It's too cold," I said. "Every time you open the door, the thermostat fights to keep it steady. It's a bad night. Do it another day." He said yes, and then treated my no like it was paperwork that was missing a page. The way I know is that he texted me, at 4:12 p.m., a photo that made my stomach fold. It was Heidi, smiling into the lens, a thin blazer over a sweater, and steam ghosting the edges of the frame. In the background, my bench, my trays, my life. "Don't be mad," he texted under the picture, like it was a wedding vow. I was in the car before I knew it, driving the 5 minutes from my apartment to my backyard like there was a cord attached to my sternum. The air was so cold it hurt my teeth when I sucked it in through my mouth. I could see their breath through the windows as shapes moving in my space. When I opened the door with my key, I could feel the heat drop. It's not dramatic. It's like someone inhales when they've been talking too long. The cold comes in on cat feet, photobombing the warmth. Out, I said.
Now.
Tyler laughed, the way he does when he doesn't know where to put himself. Relax, he said. We just need a few more. The light is perfect. There will be more light, I said. There won't be more of these. I touched the tray of seedlings like I was introducing them. He put his hands up like I'd drawn a gun. Okay, he said, still smiling at Heidi, whose expression made me ache. She looked at me like I was the reason the temperature changed. We're going, he said, but he did that thing where he didn't move and smiled like time would find a way to forgive him. I put my hand on the thermostat out of habit. It was set properly. The heater was humming, the fan moving air. I told myself I was being the buzzkill that my family had always assigned me. I told myself he would leave in 2 minutes and my babies would be fine. They left. He tossed a love you over his shoulder like a ball you don't catch on purpose. I waited for the temp to stabilize, then went back inside and made a tea I didn't want because my hands needed something. At 2 a.m., I woke up with my heart doing jumping jacks in my chest. The house was quiet in a way that made the quiet loud. I pulled on a sweater and boots and walked through the yard with a flashlight beam like a porthole. When I opened the greenhouse, the cold hit me across the face like a slap. I didn't need to check the thermostat to know. The hum wasn't there. That alive static was gone. The heater had shut off sometime after midnight. The auto reset hadn't reset. The manual reset didn't either. I cycled the breakers, called the number on the sticker that no one picks up at 2 in the morning. It doesn't take long for a certain kind of plant to give up. They try, you can see it, and then they lay down their small lives. I put the flashlight beam across the faces of my microgreens, the close-cut herbs, the small fingerlings I'd been forcing early. They were done. I tucked frost cloth over them like someone said it would help, like a blanket in a bad dream. I sat on a stool while my breath made ghosts and waited for the air to stop hurting my sinuses. At 8 a.m., light came in like a ceasefire. The heater tech arrived at 10 with a face that said you're not his first emergency. He nodded with his chin at the breaker panel. Saw this last week, he said. Someone's been flipping switches. You got kids. Just a brother, I said, because saying a child would have made my mother's heart into orphan furniture and my father would have stood with his hands in his back pockets again. He checked the panel again and pointed to a tape label that said heat. There was a footprint where the tape had been smudged. Somebody cut power, he said. Heater shut itself down to protect the unit. Your reset? Might fire again. He looked around as if the culprit might be hiding under a tray. I called Tyler, and he didn't pick up. I texted him, and he hearted my message like we were teenagers. I drove to my parents' house and walked in because there are doors you are taught are yours. Tyler was in the living room with his boots off, a blanket folded on the floor where he and Heidi had watched a movie. Hey, he said, staring at his phone. You okay? What did you touch? I said. He looked up like he didn't understand the language. What? In the greenhouse. What did you touch? He sat up. Why would I touch anything? Because when you were there, something got turned off. The heat. The panels. I could feel that glass calm again, the kind that makes your words slow. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, Maybe I hit something when I moved my bag. You don't just hit a breaker. You're being so intense, he said. Then, because I wasn't moving, because my face was something even he couldn't ignore, he said the thing that made the room rearrange in my head. I pulled the plug on the heater. For like 10 minutes, maybe. It was noisy. The room stuttered. You pulled the plug. I plugged it back in, he said defensively, like I was being pedantic. You need to chill about your little setup. It's a greenhouse, not a hospital. Don't call it little, I said, and heard myself. He grinned like he'd won. Why? I said. Why would you touch anything without asking me? I wanted to teach you, he said lightly, the words like a joke. You act like this project is everything. It's not. It's just plants. You needed to know what it's like when something breaks. He was watching my face, measuring impact like a boy checking the bounce of a ball against a garage door. My mouth did that thing where it goes dry and you reach for a glass on a table that isn't there. You wanted to teach me? I repeated. He rolled his eyes. God. You know what I mean. You needed to be knocked down a peg. Dad said. He stopped. It was nothing and everything. Dad said. In every family, there are two words that explain where the fire came from and who lit it. I looked at my father, who had walked into the doorway at some point and stood there as if he'd been framed. Did you say that? He didn't say no. He said he didn't mean to hurt anything. He didn't mean to hurt anything, I said, but he pulled out the most important thing in the room to show me that things break. I could hear my own voice shake. I have 40 trays dead. I have orders to fill. I stopped because the math was too ugly. Money wasn't the point. Except it was also the point. It's just money, Tyler said. Insurance will cover it. He said insurance like a fairy tale. It's not just money, I said, because it had taken me most of my life to admit that money was proof of time spent and sweat and skill and days I would never get back to do differently. It's the thing I built. It's the thing that makes me okay. You're being dramatic, my mother said softly, because she didn't know how to hold this argument in her hands without it spilling. He's your brother. Exactly, Tyler said, like I'd proven his thesis. Family. I left before I cried in front of any of them. Crying in front of them never once made me right. The next week was spent on the phone with the heater company, then the insurance company, then the tech again. They all wanted numbers. The cost of trays replaced. The invoice for heat. The value of lost product. The hours. The soft costs, which is what bureaucracy calls the part of your life you won't ever get back. I started putting things in a folder because that was the only form of control that felt legal. The folder became a capital letter object in my head, like a person. Is this a folder problem? I'd ask myself when something made my throat tight. If the answer was yes, I put it in there. If the answer was no, it went in the trash. I took photos of the damage. The dead trays, the collapsed leaves like language that had been erased. I took photos of the breaker panel with the smudged tape. I printed the text my brother sent me with the word teach in it, not because I wanted to ruin his life, but because I wanted to not feel crazy when the tail tilted in his favor later. My parents called to tell me they were hosting the rehearsal dinner. We're doing it family style, my mother said, excited in a way she hadn't been about anything in months. We're having fish. It's going to be nice. You can bring bread from Ruby if you want to help. What restaurant? I asked because I keep track of things other people float. Quarry, my dad said, and I had to listen so carefully to hear the word under the hum of the fan. Quarry was the nice place, the place with the napkins like scarves and the servers who glide. Quarry was where you go to be seen, not being cheap. How much is that going to cost? I asked, not because money is everything, but because money is often where truth lives. We have it covered, my dad said. We can't afford that, I said. We have it, he repeated, like the conversation had already happened. I later learned have it meant 3 credit cards, a call to a cousin, and a lot of denial. I would also learn that have it also meant we assumed you would help. Helping had always been my role, the quiet container I fitted myself into. You know how every family has that one person who takes notes, who sends the emails, who picks up the slack you don't see until it's gone. If you don't know who it is in your family, it's probably you. Tyler stopped answering my calls for a week and then texted me a series of sentences that sounded like one well-meaning person had written them for another. I didn't mean for it to escalate, he wrote. You didn't have to make this weird. Can we just get past it before the wedding? He didn't apologize for the act. He apologized for the timing. Heidi texted, I'm sorry about your greenhouse, a line that felt like putting a Band-Aid on the wrong leg. Then she wrote, I didn't know he'd say that. He stressed. I told myself she was being kind in the way you are when you think something is a small problem you can solve with tenderness. I thought about telling her everything. I didn't. I didn't want to be the reason 2 people didn't get married. I hadn't learned yet that the reasons for a thing matter and also don't. The insurance sent an adjuster who wore a tie that made him look old even though he was young. He took photos with a pad that clicked. He asked me if I'd had people in my greenhouse who weren't authorized. I stood there with a mouthful of no. I looked at the tray I'd labeled Tyler's when we were kids, the way we used to write our names on food to play at fairness. The adjuster took a picture of my face without meaning to. I saw myself in the reflection of the door and thought, this is the moment I start to count. On a Tuesday, my mother called and asked me to come by because my father wanted to talk. I sat at the kitchen table listening to the smoke detector chirp like a cricket. My dad sat down and folded his hands like someone doing a deposition. It was an accident, he said. Heidi says he didn't understand the system. He pulled the plug because it was loud, and then he plugged it back in, and that's when it broke. It's a chain. He was teaching me, I said. The word tasted gray. My dad flared his nostrils. You're taking that out of context. It's impressive how quickly abuse of common sense can look like a philosophy. I want him to pay me back, I said. I didn't add that I knew he couldn't. I want you to tell him he did something wrong. I want that to be the baseline for everything else. My mother put her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. It made me think of curtains closing. Lena, he's your brother. He's about to start a family. You don't take a man down before he starts. If I had recorded her then and played it back to her, I wonder if she would have hurt herself. That's the kind of grace you don't get. What about my family? I asked. What about me? You don't have a family, my dad said, and he said it in the purely descriptive way that men sometimes use when what they really mean is that you haven't made yourself into something they expected. My mouth went hot then cold. I am a family, I said. I am my own family. He rubbed his hand over his face. You know what I mean? Yes, I said. Unfortunately, I do. Then my mother said the sentence I would carry in my pocket like a hot coin for years. We need you to forgive him, she said, so we can move forward. So he can be the man he is supposed to be. She paused and then, gentler, as if she'd noticed the way my shoulders had stiffened. We need our kids to get along. Do you need your kids to respect each other? I asked. Do you need your kids not to use each other without asking? You're being so, my mother started. Rational, I said, because I had to call myself something when the word dramatic had worn a groove in my spine. They asked me to cover things. Not the whole thing, at first.
Just help with this bill.
That bill. The florist had asked for an extra deposit. The DJ wanted a separate check for the lighting. The restaurant would take 2 separate cards.
Could I step in?
Could I just make it easy? I can't be the family ATM, I said one afternoon on the phone to my father when he chuckled at something my brother said in the background and realized he'd misdialed. You have to stop seeing me as a cushion. When you make more money than the rest of us, you can't be surprised that we come to you, he said, like he'd discovered gravity. It's not that I make more, I said. It's that I manage what I make. Same difference. No, I thought. It's the only difference. So I made a plan like a person who can't bear to be surprised anymore. I put together the receipts. I printed texts. I made a binder because a binder is a weapon that looks like peace. I made a note to self. Next time someone says you're dramatic, show them the index. I also called the restaurant. You can call the restaurant, it turns out. You can be the person who asks questions. The manager was kind in a way that made me feel like he had a sister. I explained that there had been a misunderstanding in my family about the bill. We can split it any way you want, he said. We can put a note on the res. It's so not a big deal. It is in my family, I said, and he said, I believe you, which made me laugh in that way I hate, dry and sharp, not because it's funny, but because the alternative is crying. The week before the rehearsal dinner, I stopped answering Tyler's texts. Boundaries feel mean at first, like you've turned the music down at a party everyone else was enjoying, but if your entire life has been set to someone else's volume, quiet is intoxicating.
It's also terrifying.
You can hear yourself think in the gaps. You hear the parts of you that are scared you'll be punished for doing the thing people who love you say you're allowed to do. I told myself the dinner could be the reset they wanted if we did it honestly. I told myself I'd be the person who said the thing, because none of them could. Not because I liked that role, but because it kept eating me when I pretended it wasn't mine. I wrote what I needed to say on a note card and put it in my pocket. It wasn't a speech. It was a list. Remember, he said teach. Remember, they used your name. Remember, you matter. That's how I ended up standing at a table in Quarry, the check presenter warm under my hand, the server hovering like she'd signed up to be a mediator in a class she thought was about wine. The bill was a number, and the number was a symbol, and none of that is how food is supposed to taste. It's her treat. My father had said, like I was a gender rather than a person. I'm a woman, and I can pay. I can also choose not to. What do you want to talk about? My mother asked like a challenge, and I took a breath through my nose because if I didn't, I was going to run a hand down the back of my chair and find splinters. I want to be clear, I said. I slid the folder out of my bag because I am not subtle when the stakes are my life. I set it on the table like a dessert. I'm not paying for a dinner that is being used to force me to pretend that nothing happened. Tyler started, then stopped because Heidi put her hand on his wrist. I watched for the flinch, the withdraw, the tell of a man who isn't used to being touched this way. He didn't pull back. My aunt whispered to my mother. My mother shushed her, without looking away from me. I realized all at once that I was shaking, a fine tremor at the edge of my fingers, and I hated that my body was telling the truth louder than my mouth. I'm not refusing because I can't, I said. I'm refusing because this is wrong. Because you told the server to put the bill on me, without asking me, as a test of whether I had forgiven my brother for destroying something I built. You want forgiveness to look like money. You want me to turn something into nothing, so we can keep having dinners like this where you go home feeling full. That's not fair, my dad said, and the tone in his voice told me that what he meant was, you're making me look bad in front of people. I have receipts, I said. I opened the folder. I pulled out the printed text like someone shuffling a deck. I have his message saying he pulled the plug to teach me. I have my insurance claim. I have the invoice for the replacement trays. I have the text where you asked me to cover the florist you told your cousin you were handling. I have the email you sent to the restaurant telling them to route the bill to me. I held up the email. I'm going to read it now if you say I made this up. My dad had always been a man who didn't believe in photocopiers. He made a face like he'd bit into cardboard.
Don't, he said.
Heidi leaned forward, eyes on the email. You emailed the restaurant, she said softly to my dad, like she was asking if he'd run a red light and expected the ticket to be mailed to someone else. I wanted to make it easy, he said. He said easy like he thought the word would reveal a door where there was a wall. Easy for who? I asked.
For you.
For him. I angled the text toward the table, the one where Tyler wrote, You needed to learn it's just stuff. He was sure of his handwriting. He didn't even remember writing it until it was paper. I didn't mean, he started. You meant exactly that, I said. You meant to show me that you could wreck what I'd made and I'd forgive you, because that's what I always do. You always make things bigger than they have to be, he shot back, flush rising like a bad sun. So do you? I said. Except you do it by breaking them. My mother set her napkin neatly beside her plate, aligning it with the fork. She had perfected the art of looking composed while something inside her rattled. We're not having this conversation in public, she said. This is kicking up dust to make us all cough. I nodded toward the door where the server hovered, doing her job, keeping her eyes low, not wanting to catch the wave. This is public because you made it public when you put your bill on me and didn't give me a chair. This is public because you chose a symbol as a weapon and you asked everyone at this table to be a witness. This is me choosing to testify. My aunt said, My God, and then, language, like I'd said something obscene. Language is the problem, I said. We keep calling things not what they are. We keep saying favor when we mean obligation. We keep saying family when we mean erasure. Heidi's face had changed from polite to lucid. She shifted in her seat, so she could look at me without other people's heads in the way. How much? She asked, like she was calling my bluff, but kinder than that. What are we talking about? She wasn't just talking about money. She was talking about harm. 22,000, I said. And then the loss in product. And then the time. And then the way every time I close my eyes, I see leaves turning black. And then the way I look at my hands and think maybe I should have been there. And then the way my family told me to forgive the person who did it because he's a man with a wedding coming up and I didn't have an event to put on the calendar. Silence hung like wet laundry. The server took a step back that was also a step closer. I don't have $22,000, my brother said, like I had asked him to give me his blood. I know, I said. I asked you to speak to the part of yourself that would do something like this to your one sister and then show up at a fancy restaurant and hand me a bill like it was a bouquet. I asked you to apologize in a way that looked like you understood what happened. I'm sorry, he said, automatically, a knee-jerk kneeling, then added, and then the but swallowed everything. But I didn't mean for it to go that far. You made it go that far. Say you're sorry without the but, I said. Say it and mean it, and tell me how you're going to make it right. I'm here. I'm listening. He pressed his lips together. His jaw worked. I had the wild thought that the first person to tell a man to take his time was a woman who had learned that he doesn't know what time is when it's not his. I'm sorry, he said again, slower. I don't know how to fix it. Start by not making me pay for your party, I said. Start by not making me the bank. My dad clicked his tongue. He'd done that when I was a kid when I asked for anything bigger than a paperclip. It was like he was calling a dog to heel. Lena, my mother said, voice thinning. You have to stop making everything a ledger. It already is one, I said. You're just not looking at it. I'm done being the one who balances it. A silence so complete it made the room feel underwater. Then the server, brave enough to be a human where we were trying to pretend we were more than that, said, We can split the bill any way you'd like. We can put your salad and seltzer on one check. I can separate out the bottles. She spoke directly to me like she'd elected me the representative of a group no one else wanted to claim. Do that, I said. Put my salad and my seltzer on my check. Put the rest on the card of the person who hosted the event. I looked at my parents. Which was you? My father's mouth tightened. I watched something pass through his eyes that looked like grief, but could have been rage. My mother's hand shook when she reached for her purse, the tremor that had nothing to do with the conversation now making its own points. Heidi reached into her bag and pulled out her own card. We'll cover what we owe, she said quietly. She and Tyler looked at each other, and he nodded like he wanted her to think he was generous. She didn't look at him again. I'll pay for what I ate, my aunt said, flustered, rummaging in a cavernous wallet for anything but the answer. This is, well, messy, I supplied. It's messy because you looked away when he did it. It's messy because you told me to forgive him and be the bigger person. I am the bigger person. In the way that counts. In the way where you decide to stop letting yourself be made small. That's enough, my dad said, voice low. He flicked his eyes toward the manager. I felt suddenly deeply tired. It's never been enough, I said. The server came back with 2 checks. She placed one in front of me and one next to my father's water glass. The big check looked heavy. No one reached forward. Heidi broke the spell by taking hers, signing quickly, and putting the pen down like she had made a decision about something else that was not her business, and also completely her business. Lena, my mother said, a plea and a warning. I love you, I said, and I meant it in a way that made me want to sit down on the floor and not get up again for an hour. I love you, she said back, like she had to ask permission of her husband with her eyes to let the words out. I'm going to go, I said, picking up my tiny check, leaving my tip in cash on the table because I do believe in paying people for their labor. I'll see you at the wedding if you want me there, and if no one tries to put anything else on me that doesn't belong to me. You're going to ruin his day, my dad said, a last ditch. He ruined my year, I said. He can live. Tyler stood up abruptly, his chair scraping. For a second, I thought he was going to hug me, that body memory we still carried from being kids who slept on the floor in the living room on New Year's Eve. He put his hands in his pockets instead and moved like he was going to say something true. He didn't. I'll call you, he said, and I said, don't, because sometimes the kindest thing a person can do is not. The thing about families is that they don't explode. They seethe. They settle into new shapes and pretend they were always that way. Sometimes the quiet is peace. Sometimes it's the lull between 2 cars passing. In the days after Quarry, my phone filled up with paragraphs. My mother sent me recipes and links like nothing had happened, a therapy of normalcy I didn't consent to. My father sent me practical questions about the parking situation for the wedding and whether I'd be bringing anyone. Tyler didn't text at all. Heidi sent me, at midnight one night, a question mark and then, are you okay? I wasn't okay. I was sleeping with the light on sometimes like a child. I was checking the greenhouse twice before bed, as if a different disaster would slink in, and I could catch it before it claimed what was mine. Ruby brought me a bag of bread that still had the warmth of the oven in it and sat on my back step with me without asking for the story. "We've got you," she said, and I believed her because I could see flour on the sleeve of her coat. "There are people who love you with their hands, not their mouths." The wedding became a project I could observe without joining. The seating plan, the place cards, the playlist. I was included the way you include a distant cousin you don't want to offend. A link here, an ask there. You don't assign much to the dependable person.
You don't need to.
They just show up and carry chairs because someone has to. At the rehearsal, I centered myself in kindness for the length of my brother's life, and then let go. I stood next to my mother while the coordinator told us where to walk, and imagined the sprinkler system in the yard kicking on at sunrise. I watched my dad look at my mother's hands like he could slow something by watching it closely. I watched my brother fail to catch Heidi's eye after a joke that didn't land. Heidi sought me out. I read his text. She said quietly, no preamble, after the rehearsal broke up and people who were still holding prop bouquets drifted toward the door in little clusters. The one where he said teach. I didn't say anything because this was a moment for her, not me.
He doesn't get it yet, she said.
And I love him. But there is a version of him that gets it, and I don't know how to find him. You can't, I said, and I felt cruel saying it even though it was just the shape of truth. He has to find himself.
You can want it.
You can ask for it. You can demand it. You can draw the map. But you can't carry him there. Do you think it's a mistake? She asked, and we both knew she didn't mean the text. I think love is the thing, I said. And boundaries are the thing that makes love possible. It was the best I could offer 2 days before she was scheduled to stand in front of everyone she knew in a dress that had required 4 fittings. She squeezed my arm, the way you squeeze a fruit to check for sweetness without bruising it. I'm sorry, she said again. I believe you. The wedding, like most weddings, was beautiful in the way a rented day is. The sun did what it was asked. The vows were standard and sincere. My mother cried at the part where 2 people promise to do the impossible for the length of time humans pretend is forever. My father danced with my mother and graduated their faces from tense to soft like a time-lapse. Tyler cried, and I believe those tears too, because men sometimes weep when they see themselves with the clarity that ceremony offers, and what they see is small and huge at once. I am a person who has been loved anyway. I danced with Ruby and with Zoe, and with Sam, and with Heidi's cousin who had a laugh like silverware in a drawer. I didn't drink much. I'm not good with champagne. I stood at the edge of the group photos and smiled in a way that wouldn't make the album look like an argument. When it was done, I put my shoes in a bag and walked barefoot to my car. I felt like I'd passed a line I couldn't see, a checkpoint where someone had looked at my papers and stamped them without meeting my eyes. Tyler called 2 weeks after. I shouldn't have touched anything, he said. His voice was weird. The bravado that he wore like a coat had a hole in it. I don't know what I was thinking. You were thinking you could, and you were thinking you could get away with it, I said, not unkindly. You were thinking that I would bend. I always thought you were the one who wouldn't, he said. You always had rules. I had to, I said. I don't know how to pay you back, he said. I can put something aside every month. He named a number that was insulting and also honest. I told him to send what he could. I told him we weren't going to put it in writing because I wasn't going to let my brother sign a contract that would make him resent me for a decade. I know what that kind of resentment looks like. It sits at the table like another relative. Heidi sent me a recipe for beans cooked in olive oil and lemon and garlic that became my dinner 3 nights in a row during a week I couldn't stand the thought of anything crunchy. She was on my side in a way that can ruin a marriage. I wanted to protect her from my love. My father started having trouble finding words in December. It was small at first, the way he reached for a noun and came back with a description. He once called a ladder the tall climbing thing with steps. He said it like he was being cute. My mother wrote it down like evidence. He called me to ask me the name of the neighbor's son, the one who had moved to Arizona, and sent a postcard with a cactus on it. I can't get it, he said, breathing hard like the word had run away from him. I had it. I lost it. The neurologist didn't call it anything at first. Then he called it something no one wants to say. Mild cognitive impairment turned to something other.
Pills. Plans.
A cloud you couldn't see, but could feel if you put your face to the wind. I started going to their house more. I put labels on things like a teacher in an English as a second language classroom.
Spoon. Plate. Stove.
He called the stove fire friend. I didn't correct him. Who could? Tyler was there sometimes. He washed dishes in a distracted way that left suds in the bowl. He left his phone face up on the counter and looked at it like it might ask him a question. Heidi organized the cabinet and then apologized for doing it like she'd rearranged a museum. The week before my father's MRI, my mother called to tell me the washer was making a sound again. When I told her I'd called a repair guy, she said, "No, your father can fix it." And I thought, this is how women get broken. We keep asking men to do things they used to be able to do because we can't bear to admit that the world has moved under our feet. I called the repair guy. It is strange to write about funerals while you're still living. It's like saying your planet's name out loud while you're on it. The morning my father died, the light was pretense. It was the kind that tends to you. He had an episode during the night that looked like a bad dream from outside and a nightmare from inside. By the time I got there, the EMTs had already let the house take a breath, the way houses do after an emergency, when the air seems to change texture. My mother was wearing the sweater I bought her the week before, the one with buttons like little bones. He went fast, she said, and then she sat down like someone had unspooled her. Tyler stood in the kitchen with his hands on his hips, bouncing on his heels like there was a beat only he could hear. He kept saying, I was here, like it conferred something. I made calls with a notebook and a pen because someone has to. The calls felt like a road you drive, because that's where the signs point. The car accelerates on its own. You tell the funeral home you want direct cremation. You tell your aunt, who immediately tells everyone else. You call work even if you work for yourself. You write down numbers you don't recognize because you will need them later when a form asks and you can't remember your own name. The funeral was small because my father was not a big party man and because his friends had died or moved or become stories. The pastor from a church my father hadn't attended in years said words that sounded like he had cribbed them from a book but tried to make them fit.
He did a decent job.
I stood up and said my piece and then I sat down. Tyler stood and couldn't finish his sentence, which was more beautiful than anything he could have said. After the funeral, my mother wanted a house full, so we had one. People brought casseroles like proof. I stood at the sink with Heidi washing dishes the right way this time because grief does that. It puts you in your body. She touched my arm and whispered, I told him to call you about the other thing. And even then I knew she meant money and didn't mean money, and I said, okay, because yes is easier in grief, and no would have broken something that didn't need to break right then. That night, I went home and sat in the greenhouse with the lights off. The heater hummed an obligato. I pulled my knees to my chest and put my forehead on them and breathed in the wet earth smell that is the closest thing I have to a reliable God. Then I went inside, wrote a list for the next day, and slept like the body does when it cannot bear itself and still has to. The green grew, the way it does when you think it won't. New trays. New tiny teeth of leaves. New rows that looked like lines of handwriting, careful and eager. Ruby brought me eggs from a friend. Zoe brought me a handful of strawflower heads and seeds in a paper envelope with my name written on it. I put the seeds away for spring like a promise to myself from a friend who knew how to keep one. Tyler came by one afternoon and stood at the door of the greenhouse, not coming in, like a vampire in movies only allowed to cross if invited. He looked at the frame like it was a piece of modern art he didn't get but felt he should.
I've been paying, he said.
I know it's small. I know it's nothing. It's not nothing, I said. I'm going to sell the bike, he said, and then he said, don't say anything, before I could open my mouth, because he was the kind of man who believed you could trade an object for a personality. He put his hand in his pocket like his hands were always cold. I nodded because this was his plan, and plans are the kinds of prayers men are allowed in families like ours. After my father died, the road narrowed. My mother shrank in the way of women who lived for men like my father. She called me every day at 9, and then again at 1. Sometimes she had a list. Sometimes she told me a story about a bird she'd seen near the porch. The tremor got worse. The cups on her shelf had migrated to lower shelves, the way a woman does when she doesn't admit she can't reach things anymore and instead tells herself a new story about where things belong. I showed up. Tyler showed up less. Heidi showed up even when the thing that I suspected was happening in her marriage had begun to happen. Distance is a clever creature. It moves quietly and rearranges furniture. When my mother fell and cut her forehead on the corner of the coffee table, I changed the bandage like I'd done it for a living. She kept saying she didn't want stitches, that a scar felt like something people have when they've lived, and I said, "We can handle a stitch." And she said, "You probably can." Tyler told me in a text that he and Heidi were taking a break. He said it like a person who doesn't want you to ask questions in case the truth spills, and you have to clean it up. I didn't ask. She texted me separately to say she loved me, and that she would still come by, and that I didn't have to take a side because sometimes sides are just lines we draw in the dirt to make us feel like we have control. I walked my mother through the house, wrote labels in bigger letters.
Light. Door. Phone.
I put together a binder for her next to the binder I now use for everything, a map to a life. She looked at it like a book someone else had left under her pillow. I met a woman at the market in April, the kind of woman who sees you and acts like she's surprised and delighted you exist. She bought micros and then bought more, and then asked me about the color of the grow lights because she had art in her, and science too. Her name was Claire. We had coffee that turned into a walk that turned into a plan to meet later, that we both kept. She had a laugh that ran downhill. When she came into the greenhouse for the first time, she said, "I feel safe here," and I knew she meant me too. My mother liked her. She didn't say, "When are you going to give me grandchildren?" like she used to as a habit of conversation. She said, "What do you like about our girl?" And Claire said, "She tells the truth quietly," and my mother said, "That she does." I installed cameras at the greenhouse not because I didn't trust my family, but because I finally had admitted to myself that I needed to know where my things ended and other people began. I didn't share the password with anyone. It is a kind of relief. The feeling of setting a perimeter. It is a kind of thrill, too.
I was 41 by then.
I felt like I was 30, and also like I had been old for a very long time. What I learned. Family is not a bank you can't withdraw from. It's a border you get to draw. My parents taught me to be helpful, to be hands. They didn't teach me to say no. I learned that from a greenhouse and a bill and a man who pulled a plug to see what would happen. Forgiveness is not a bill you pay to quiet a room. It is not a dinner you cover because the people who raised you prefer a gloss to a truth. Forgiveness might not come at all. And if it does, it doesn't look like a transaction. It looks like insisting on accurate naming. He destroyed my greenhouse. He didn't make a mistake. He harmed something I built on purpose. And now we all live in the world where that happened. Receipts matter. Not because you want to be petty, but because gaslighting is a tourist that visits every family where the favored child has a nice face and away with a shrug. Paper turns rumors into evidence. Evidence gives you back your voice. Found family is not a consolation prize. It is oxygen. Ruby sitting with me on the back step, Zoe pressing seeds into my palm, Claire walking into my space and declaring it safe. These are the stitches. Blood is sacred, yes, but it is not the only piece of God we get to keep. Found family is chosen gravity. Illness does to a family what winter does to bad roofs. It reveals what leaks. My father's decline made us all into our truest selves. My mother wore denial like a sweater and then put it away when it got too warm for it. Tyler learned he can say the words, "I don't know how to fix it." I learned that the product of my body and mind is not a hobby, not a cute girl project, not an easy potluck contribution. It's work. It's dignity. It's me. Boundaries are a kindness. To yourself first, and to the people who might learn from them if they stop pressing. Saying no does not ruin the party. It changes the playlist. Someone else can dance to it in another room. I can survive a freeze. Not because I am special. Because I am ordinary in the way good things are. Because I made a plan and used it. Because I printed texts and took photos and called the restaurant and said, "Split the check," even when my voice was shaking. Because I walked out carrying only what was mine. The last thing is this. When I think of that night at Quarry, I remember the moment before I stood up. The weight of the pen. The coolness of the billfold. The decision in my body, like warm water pouring out a tap that had been closed for years. It wasn't bravery. It was boredom with my own silence. And when I think of my greenhouse in the dark, with the heater humming and the air moving just right, I think of my father's mouth when he tried to find the word for ladder. The tall climbing thing with steps. That's what these last few years have been. A thing I climb. Steps I count. A path upward. The view changing. The air cooler and cleaner. And me, my own person, hand on something sturdy, not at the top, but higher than I was. I learned I can walk away, with a bill unpaid, and a life sightline that finally makes sense. I learned I can grow in a place no one watered for me. I learned that love is the work and the harvest is a kind of quiet. And I learned that the only voice I need to hear when a check arrives with my name on it is my own. I folded that voice like a napkin, set it in my lap, and let the rest fall away.